I never imagined I'd wake up one morning to discover that an HOA had already built 68 brand new houses on land that legally belonged to me. From the road, the rows of sparkling homes looked like a picture-perfect suburb, complete with manicured lawns and for sale signs fluttering in the breeze. But beneath the fresh paint and shiny windows was a truth no one wanted to admit. Every single one of those houses was standing on stolen ground. My grandfather's farm, our family's legacy, had been quietly erased from county records decades ago, replaced with fraudulent boundaries and rubber-stamped permits. When I uncovered the original surveys and my grandfather's warning letter, I realized something chilling. Not only had the HOA overstepped, but by law, I now owned every house they had built. What followed was a battle of intimidation, lawsuits, and small-town corruption, until I turned the tables in a way they never saw coming. Before we dive into this story, drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. I love seeing our community from around the world come together. When I got the call, it was barely sunrise. The voice on the other end was shaking with outrage. "Daniel, you need to come back. They're building on your grandfather's land. 68 houses, whole streets of them, and they've already put up the signs." For a few seconds, I thought my old neighbor, Mrs. Atkins, must have been confused. She'd lived next door to my grandfather, Henry Harris, for 40 years, and she'd seen her fair share of county construction projects, maybe a road widening or some temporary utility work. But the urgency in her tone made me throw on clothes, grab my keys, and drive the 4 hours back to Brookdale without stopping. By the time my car hit the dirt road leading to my grandfather's farmhouse, my stomach was twisted into knots. I hadn't been back here since the funeral 6 months earlier. The place had always been a sanctuary, golden fields, stretching wide, an old red barn leaning under the weight of years, the air thick with the smell of clover and soil. Now that peace was shattered. As I crested the hill overlooking the northern acreage, the view hit me like a punch to the chest. Bulldozers had flattened the fields where Grandpa once grew soybeans. Asphalt gleamed in the sun where rich black soil had been. Brand new townhouses lined up in military precision, beige siding and gray shingles, each with identical white fences. A banner flapped in the wind, "Welcome to Maple Ridge East," starting at $400,000. My car tires crunched on the gravel as I pulled closer. Workers in hard hats moved about planting shrubs, painting trim, hammering nails. It was no half-built speculation project. This was nearly finished. Families would be moving in soon if they hadn't already. Standing near the show home, clipboard in hand, was a woman I didn't recognize. Her blonde hair was tied in a perfect bun, and her blazer didn't have a speck of dust on it, despite the construction chaos around her. She exuded control, the type who didn't just enforce rules, but created them for her own benefit. I approached, my pulse thudding in my ears. "Excuse me," I said. "What's going on here?" She glanced up, gave me a look as if I were a door-to-door salesman she had no time for, and returned to scribbling on her clipboard. Finally, she answered, "Residential development. Maple Ridge Homeowners Association is expanding." "I'm Daniel Harris," I said, planting my feet. "My grandfather owned this farm, Henry Harris. He left it to me when he passed. This land belongs to my family." She extended her hand with a plastic smile that never reached her eyes. "Lucinda Ward, president of Maple Ridge HOA." Her tone was silk, but sharp beneath. There must be some misunderstanding. "Maple Ridge purchased this parcel years ago. We have every permit, every approval from the county." I didn't shake her hand. Instead, I stared. "That's impossible. My grandfather never sold this farm." Lucinda's eyes glimmered with something, pity or disdain, I couldn't tell. "Perhaps he didn't tell you. The sale closed in 1995. Everything is official. I suggest you take your questions to our legal department. Now, if you'll excuse me," she was already turning back to bark orders into her phone. Behind me, bulldozers roared again, tearing into soil that had fed generations of Harrises. My fists clenched helplessly. Later that afternoon, I pulled into the farmhouse driveway, dust swirling around me. The house looked frozen in time, peeling white paint, rusted mailbox, the porch swing creaking in the breeze. Mrs. Atkins sat there waiting with 2 glasses of iced tea, her face tight with worry. "They've been at it for months," she said, pressing a glass into my hand. "Your granddad fought them tooth and nail before he passed. He knew something wasn't right. I remember him muttering about papers, about boundaries." "Papers?" I asked. She nodded. "He spent his last weeks digging through his office. Said he had to protect the farm." I stepped into the house, the familiar scent of pipe tobacco and old leather wrapping around me like a memory. Grandpa's office was just as he'd left it. Piles of almanacs, shelves of ledgers, decades of rain charts and crop yields carefully handwritten. I opened drawers, flipped through binders, found nothing about a land sale. Hours passed. The sun sank, shadows crawling across the walls. Just as I was ready to give up, my foot struck something loose beneath the desk. I knelt, pried at the floorboard with a screwdriver, and it lifted free. A small metal box lay in the hollow. A key dangled from a nail on the underside of the desk. My hands trembled as I unlocked it. Inside lay a stack of yellowed documents, Grandpa's will naming me sole heir. The original farm deed, its ink faded but still legible. A survey from 1915, updated in 1979, and folded carefully on top a letter addressed to me in his familiar handwriting. If you're reading this, it began, then someone is trying to take what is ours. Developers have circled this land for decades. They came to me with papers, lies, and promises. I never signed. If they say otherwise, it's a forgery. The truth is, in the boundaries, check the old surveys. Compare them to the county's records. You'll see what they did. My chest tightened. Grandpa had known this day was coming. He'd left me the tools to fight it. I spread the papers across the desk, my mind racing. The 1915 survey showed the farm stretching far beyond what the county claimed, now an extra 80 acres, including the very land where Lucinda's 68 houses stood. If these documents held up, then Maple Ridge hadn't just trespassed. They had built entire neighborhoods on property that legally belonged to me. And under the law, if the land was mine, so were the houses. I whispered into the silence, my voice hoarse. Grandpa, I won't let you down. The stage was set. Lucinda Ward thought she had won. But she had just walked headfirst into a trap my grandfather had set decades ago, and I was about to spring it. The following morning, I sat at Grandpa's old oak kitchen table, the documents spread out like a war map. The dawn light poured through the lace curtains, highlighting the ink strokes of surveys more than a century old. Every line, every note, every signature was a weapon waiting to be unsheathed. My pulse raced as I traced the boundaries with my finger. According to these surveys, Maple Ridge HOA hadn't just stolen land, they had erected a neighborhood empire on top of my inheritance. But reading paper wasn't enough. If I was going to fight Lucinda Ward and her HOA machine, I needed professional confirmation. I dialed the one number I remembered from my childhood, Victor Tran, a lawyer who had once helped Grandpa with a property tax dispute. To my surprise, he picked up on the first ring. Daniel Harris. His voice was slow, deliberate. Haven't heard that name in years. What brings you calling so early? They built houses, Victor, I said, trying to steady my breath. 68 homes, on my land. And I've got the surveys to prove it. There was silence then, a low whistle. Bring everything to my office in Brookdale today. This isn't something you sit on. By mid-morning, I was there, my truck loaded with boxes of Grandpa's files. Victor's office smelled of old books and black coffee. He wore a wrinkled gray suit, his glasses perched at the end of his nose. As I laid the survey's deed and Grandpa's letter across his desk, he examined them like a surgeon studying x-rays. These, he said, finally, tapping the yellowed surveys, are dynamite. If authentic, and they certainly appear to be, then you're sitting on what we call a quiet title action. You'd be entitled to clear the title in your name and void anything done without your consent. And the houses, I asked, my voice low. Victor looked up, meeting my eyes. If the land is yours, Daniel, then legally, so are the structures built upon it. 68 homes. By law, you could sell them yourself, lease them, or bulldoze them if you wanted. But let's be clear, this won't be an easy fight. They'll drag you through the mud, pull every string in county government. A shiver ran down my spine. The thought of families already living in those homes kept gnawing at me. But at the same time, the law was the law, and Maple Ridge had gambled on stolen ground. Victor leaned back, steepling his fingers. First step, file for an emergency injunction. That halts any further sales or construction until ownership is clarified. Next, we'll petition for a court hearing to establish your claim. I'll also call in a forensic document examiner to analyze these signatures. If your grandfather never sold, then someone forged papers to make it look that way. I nodded, clutching Grandpa's letter like a lifeline. He warned me. He knew they'd try this. That afternoon, we drove to the county courthouse. The marble hallways echoed as we filed the injunction. The clerk stamped the papers with a heavy thunk that sounded to me like the first cannon blast in a long war. But the HOA wasn't going to sit idle. By the time I returned to the farmhouse that evening, a white SUV with Maple Ridge compliance stenciled on the side was parked at the end of the driveway. Two men in polo shirts leaned against it, arms crossed, pretending to check their phones. When I tried to drive past, one waved a clipboard. Violation notice, he said without even looking me in the eye. Unauthorized vehicle access. This road is now HOA property. I laughed, sharp and bitter. Nice try. This is my driveway. Always has been. He shrugged. Talk to the board. He slapped the notice against my windshield before stepping back. Inside, Mrs. Atkins waited with dinner she'd brought over chicken casserole, steaming and fragrant. Her hands shook as she set the dish on the counter. Daniel, they're gonna make your life hell. They did it to the Johnsons, to the Ramirez family. Anyone who stood in their way got buried under fines and code violations until they sold. Not me, I said, though, my stomach tightened. I've got something they don't expect proof. That night, I combed through more of Grandpa's papers. Ledger after ledger of rainfall crop yields repair notes. The man had tracked everything. And then in a folder marked easements and boundaries, I found copies of county filings from 1986 and 1998, both shifting the northern boundary of the farm. The signatures were shaky imitations of Grandpa's handwriting, but I remembered his neat, sharp penmanship. He would never have scrawled like this. The next morning, Victor arranged for a certified surveyor, a man named Carter Holt, to walk the property. Carter was in his 60s with sunburnt skin and a no-nonsense demeanor. He studied the old surveys, then spent hours marking corners with GPS equipment. When he returned, he shook his head. Your grandfather's surveys were spot on. The county records, completely off. They shaved nearly 80 acres north and east, Daniel. That's not a mistake. That's deliberate. Hearing it out loud made the weight sink deeper. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was theft. Meanwhile, news spread fast. By the third day, I had families showing up at the farmhouse, nervous and angry. A young couple, the Millers, knocked timidly on the door. We just closed on a house last month, the husband said, wringing his baseball cap in his hands. Are you saying it's not ours? I sighed. The land legally belongs to me. That makes the house technically mine too. But I'm not here to ruin people's lives. I want fairness. I want justice for what the HOA stole from my family. Behind them, more residents gathered, faces, pale children clinging to parents, neighbors whispering. Panic was brewing, and I could see Lucinda's plan pit me against the very people she'd duped. That night, as I locked up Grandpa's office, my phone buzzed with a blocked number. I answered. You're making a mistake, Lucinda's voice purred through the static. You think you've found some dusty old papers. The county stands with us, the bank stands with us, and soon those homeowners will stand against you. Drop your claim, Daniel. Walk away while you still can. Her confidence was venomous, but I heard the edge of fear beneath it, and that gave me strength. I set the phone down, staring out the window at the dark silhouettes of those 68 homes. My grandfather had built a life out of this soil. Lucinda thought she could erase it with bulldozers and signatures. But she had underestimated both him and me, because this wasn't just about saving land, it was about reclaiming an entire community from corruption. And now I wasn't just defending the farm, I was preparing to legally own every single house she had built. 3 days after filing the injunction, the courthouse granted us a temporary stop work order. For the first time since I had driven back into Brookdale, the bulldozers on the northern fields went silent. The crews stood idle, their yellow machines parked in neat rows like an army waiting for new orders. To me, it felt like the first breath after nearly drowning, but I knew it wouldn't last. Victor met me at the farmhouse early that morning, his tie askew and his briefcase bulging with files. They'll challenge the injunction immediately, he said, setting papers down on the kitchen table where Grandpa once balanced ledgers. But this buys us time. Time to build the bigger case. And Daniel, this will not be a clean fight. Lucinda Ward has money lawyers and political friends. We need more than surveys, we need evidence of fraud. He pulled out the copies I'd found of the 1986 and 1998 boundary changes. Look at these signatures. I've already scheduled a handwriting analyst to examine them. If they confirm forgery, that's criminal. And if it's criminal, we can push harder. I nodded, though, my stomach churned. The thought of dragging Grandpa's name into court documents, of exposing decades of corruption, weighed heavy. Still, I could almost hear his voice. Land is legacy, Daniel. You don't let anyone steal legacy. Victor's plan was precise. Step 1, establish the surveys as valid. Step 2, prove the county records had been manipulated. Step 3, show that Maple Ridge HOA acted knowing the land wasn't theirs. If all three held, then every house standing there now would legally belong to me. Later that afternoon, we drove to the county recorder's office. The building was a squat brick structure, with fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. The clerk, a tired woman named Carolyn, looked startled when Victor requested the original transfer documents. After some hemming and hawing, she disappeared into the archives. When she returned, she carried 2 thin files. Victor spread them across the counter. I leaned in. There it was, the 1,995 sale of my grandfather's northern acreage. The buyer was listed as Brookdale Development LLC, one of the many shells tied to Maple Ridge HOA. And the signature, supposedly Grandpa's, was a weak, jagged scrawl, nothing like the confident cursive I'd seen on every farm ledger. Worse, the notary block was blank. No seal, no stamp. Just an empty square. "This is garbage," Victor muttered. "Not even properly notarized." If this passed through county review, someone looked the other way. Carolyn's lips tightened. She lowered her voice. "You didn't hear it from me, but Commissioner Avery was on the planning board back then. He and Ward's husband are golf buddies. Everyone knew Brookdale Development wasn't exactly clean, but around here, money talks louder than justice." My anger simmered. They'd counted on Grandpa being too sick, too old, too alone to fight back, but they hadn't counted on me. When we stepped outside, a black SUV idled across the street. The driver's sunglasses, hiding his eyes, pretended to check his phone as we walked by. My gut told me it wasn't coincidence. Maple Ridge was watching. That evening, a storm rolled in. Rain hammered the tin roof of the farmhouse as I sat surrounded by papers, highlighter in hand. Mrs. Atkins knocked on the door with more casserole, shaking her head. "They sent another letter today," she said, pulling a damp envelope from her pocket. "HOA claims you owe them $1 200 fines for leaving unregistered vehicles on your property. They even took photos of your truck." I laughed bitterly. On my own land. Incredible. She placed a gentle hand on my arm. "Don't let them wear you down, Daniel. They tried the same tricks on others until they broke. But you've got Henry's blood. You fight like he would." The next morning, Victor called me back to his office. His handwriting analyst had delivered a preliminary opinion. The signatures on the boundary changes were highly inconsistent with my grandfather's known samples. In layman's terms, forgery. As if that weren't enough, Victor's intern had dug deeper into Brookdale Development LLC. The same 6 names appeared repeatedly across connected companies: Lucinda Ward, her husband Martin, Commissioner Avery, a planning board member named Wilson, and 2 local contractors. It was a web of conflicts, each one stickier than the last. Victor leaned forward, his eyes sharp. "Here's the beauty of it, Daniel. They used your land as collateral for a $12 million construction loan. That means the bank thinks it's theirs. But if the court rules it was stolen property, the loan is built on sand. The bank will come after them, not you. And trust me, banks don't forgive fraud." For the first time, I felt the tide shift, however slightly. It wasn't just me against the HOA anymore. It was me, the law, and soon enough the bank's lawyers circling like wolves. That evening I returned to the construction site. The heavy machinery sat quiet tarps covering unfinished roofs. Yet Lucinda was there, her heels clicking on the wet pavement, her phone glued to her ear. She spotted me instantly, her smile sharp as a blade. "You think you've won something," she said, snapping her phone shut. "A little injunction, cute. But these houses are sold. Families are moving in. Do you really want to be the man who takes homes away from children?" Her words hit like a jab, but I didn't flinch. "I want what's mine, and the law agrees." Lucinda stepped closer, her perfume sickly sweet against the damp air. "Let me make this simple. Drop your claim. We'll cut you a check for $2 million tax-free. You walk away, and nobody ever knows. $2 million. The number hung in the air like bait on a hook. Enough to change my life. Enough to buy 10 farms somewhere else. But I thought of Grandpa's letter, his neat script warning me not to let them steal what he'd protected for decades. I met her eyes. Not for sale. Not at any price. For a split second, her composure cracked. Then she laughed cold and hollow. "You're a fool, Harris. You have no idea who you're up against." She turned on her heel and strode away, her umbrella snapping open against the rain. I stood there, soaked and furious, staring at the rows of houses she had built on stolen soil. 68 homes, each one a monument to arrogance and fraud. But soon enough, they wouldn't belong to Lucinda Ward or Maple Ridge HOA. They would belong to me. And I was going to use the law itself to take them back brick by brick. The following week felt like living under siege. The HOA had shifted tactics from construction to harassment, and they wielded their rules like weapons. Every day, a new notice appeared, slipped under the farmhouse door, taped to the truck windshield, or shoved into the mailbox. Unauthorized exterior paint color, improper vehicle storage, failure to maintain lawn. Each came with a fine ranging from $200 to $1,000, written on crisp Maple Ridge HOA letterhead. It was absurd. The farmhouse sat on a gravel lot surrounded by corn stubble, yet somehow they claimed jurisdiction. The intimidation didn't stop there. On Tuesday night, I heard engines growling outside. Peering through the blinds, I saw 3 SUVs parked across the end of the driveway, effectively blocking me in. Their headlights beamed into the farmhouse windows like interrogation lamps. Men stood in the shadows smoking cigarettes, their radios crackling softly. Private security, the stenciling on the doors read, "It didn't take much imagination to know whose payroll they were on." I called the sheriff's office. The dispatcher sounded apologetic but firm. "Sir, it's a civil dispute between private parties. Unless there's a direct threat, we can't intervene. You should speak with your lawyer." Victor wasn't surprised. Lucinda's pulling strings. Sheriff Daniels owes his election to the same commissioner tied to this mess. Don't waste breath. Document everything, every letter, every incident. This harassment will help us later. It was around this time that the first cracks inside Maple Ridge began to show. One night, as the rain pattered on the farmhouse roof, I heard a knock. Standing on the porch was a man I recognized vaguely from the construction site, the HOA's treasurer, Joel Whitman. He was mid-40s, balding, his shirt damp from the drizzle. He looked like a man carrying a secret too heavy to bear. "I shouldn't be here," he muttered as I ushered him inside. "If Lucinda finds out, she'll destroy me." "Then why risk it?" I asked. Joel hesitated, then pulled a flash drive from his pocket. "Because what she's doing isn't just wrong, it's illegal, and I won't go down with her." At the kitchen table, I plugged in his drive. What opened was a trove of HOA financials, budgets, invoices, bank transfers. My jaw tightened as I scrolled. Tens of thousands labeled as special assessments siphoned off into companies with suspiciously familiar names. Maple Management LLC, Ward Landscaping, Brookdale Legal Services. One search confirmed my suspicions. They were all controlled by Lucinda or her relatives. Joel rubbed his temples. Last year alone, homeowners paid nearly $500,000 in fees. Less than half went to actual community maintenance. The rest disappeared into these shell companies. "She's been bleeding people dry for years. Why come to me?" I asked. "Because you scared her. The minute you showed those surveys, I saw it in her eyes. She's losing control, and people in this community are tired. They've been fined for planting tomatoes, for hanging laundry, for having kids' bikes on the porch. They're ready for someone to stand up." I nodded slowly. Grandpa's voice echoed again. "Land isn't just dirt, Daniel. It's the people who depend on it. Maybe this battle wasn't only about reclaiming acres. Maybe it was about freeing an entire neighborhood from tyranny disguised as rules." The next day, evidence of that anger arrived at my door. Families began showing up nervously at first. The Johnsons fined $500 because their mailbox wasn't architecturally harmonious. The Ramirez family threatened with foreclosure over an unauthorized shed. A single mother named Leah who paid $900 after her son left a basketball hoop in the driveway. Each story carried the same weight, humiliation, fear, and exhaustion. One by one, I showed them Grandpa's surveys, the forged documents, the fraudulent transfers. At first, they were skeptical, afraid to believe anyone could beat Lucinda. But when Joel joined us and explained the financial records, he'd uncovered something changed. Hope flickered in their eyes, faint but real. That evening, my phone buzzed with texts from unknown numbers. "We support you. Ward fined us $300 for a garden gnome. Another, she made us tear down a porch swing. Count us in." By midnight, I had 27 messages. A small army of the disillusioned. Of course, Lucinda noticed. 2 nights later, as I sat on the porch sipping coffee, my phone rang. Her voice slid through the speaker like oil. "Daniel, it would be a shame if this fight ruined you. Brookdale's a small town. Contractors, inspectors, even utility companies, they all answer to us. Already noticed your water pressure. Imagine what happens when your electricity fails." The line clicked dead. A chill ran down my spine. Within 24 hours, the threats became real. The farmhouse water pressure dropped to a trickle, then stopped. When I called the utility company, they claimed scheduled maintenance. That same evening, a county inspector arrived, unannounced, clipboard in hand. He cited me for faulty wiring, a leaning porch railing, and a non-compliant septic system, each violation carrying a fine. The total repairs would cost thousands. The final insult came when a pizza delivery driver refused my order, saying he couldn't find my address anymore. Somehow my property had been removed from the GPS system. It was psychological warfare, and I was the target. But instead of breaking me, it hardened my resolve. That night, Joel returned with more files, his eyes darting nervously toward the darkened fields, where Maple Ridge's security still lurked. He opened his laptop and showed me internal HOA meeting minutes. In bold letters, one entry read, "Motion passed to use remaining Harris parcel as collateral for expansion loan. Title irregularities dismissed as settled. Title irregularities, I repeated. They knew. Joel nodded grimly. They always knew. They counted on no one caring enough to fight. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling beams blackened with age. Well, they counted wrong. The following morning I drafted a plan. No more waiting for Lucinda to strike. I would gather the homeowners, expose the fraud, and offer them something Maple Ridge never had: honesty. If the court ruled in my favor and all signs pointed that way, I wouldn't evict families. Instead, I'd sell them their homes fairly, legally, and without the tyranny of bogus fines. It was bold, risky, and bound to make Lucinda furious. But for the first time since stepping foot back in Brookdale, I felt like I wasn't just defending Grandpa's farm. I was fighting for an entire community. And this time, I wasn't alone. 2 weeks later, the community center was packed to the rafters. Folding chairs scraped against the linoleum floor as families filed in, murmuring anxiously. Some clutched stacks of HOA violation notices. Others carried manila folders stuffed with receipts for arbitrary special assessments. I stood near the front palms, sweating, clutching Grandpa's surveys like they were shields in a battlefield. Victor had insisted on a public reveal. Sunlight is the best disinfectant, he told me that morning. If you want the tide to turn, you need these people to see the truth for themselves. At exactly 7 o'clock, the side doors burst open. In walked Lucinda Ward, heels clicking like gunshots against the floor. She wore a crimson blazer and the kind of smile that didn't warm but warned. A group of board members trailed behind her, their faces tight with unease. "Good evening, neighbors," she called, striding toward the stage. "Tonight is about celebrating Maple Ridge's growth. 68 beautiful homes, new families, and rising property values." "Lies," someone shouted from the crowd. A ripple of agreement spread across the room. Lucinda's smile faltered for a fraction of a second before snapping back into place. "We'll take questions after the presentation." I stepped forward, then raising my voice. "This can't wait. My name is Daniel Harris, grandson of Henry Harris, the man who owned this land for 70 years, and I have proof Maple Ridge is building on stolen property." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Lucinda froze, her knuckles whitening as she gripped the podium. I lifted the first document high. "This is the original survey from 1915, and this," I held up another, "is the update from 1979. Both show the northern boundary running nearly 80 acres further than what the county claims today. 80 acres, neighbors. That means the 68 houses built here sit on land that still belongs to my family." The room erupted. Voices rose in disbelief, anger, and fear. A man in the back shouted, "Are you saying my house isn't mine?" His wife grabbed his arm, her face pale. I steadied myself. "I'm saying Maple Ridge lied. They used forged documents and corrupt officials to erase the boundaries of my grandfather's farm, and then they built over it. But here's the law. If the land is mine, and the court will decide soon, then every house built on it is legally mine too. Which means the HOA doesn't own this neighborhood. I do." The crowd exploded into chaos. Some homeowners looked horrified, others furious. A young mother clutched her baby tighter, whispering frantically to her husband. The board members behind Lucinda exchanged panicked glances. Lucinda slammed her palm on the podium. "This is outrageous. He's here to extort you to steal what you rightfully purchased. Don't fall for his trickery." I walked forward, placing copies of the surveys and forged transfers on the podium. "Look at the signatures. Compare them to Grandpa's handwriting in his ledgers. Even a layman can see it's not his. And here's the kicker. I pulled another folder from my bag. The HOA used my land as collateral for a $12 million loan. If the court rules for me, that loan collapses. Tell me, Lucinda, did you inform homeowners about that little detail?" Her mask cracked. A bead of sweat glistened on her temple. Joel Whitman, the treasurer, stood abruptly from the board's row. His voice trembled but carried through the microphone. "He's telling the truth. I've seen the accounts. Money's been siphoned for years. Special assessments, landscaping, contracts, security fees, all funneling back to companies tied to Lucinda and her family." The room fell silent. Every eye turned to Lucinda. "You traitor," she hissed at Joel. "You'll regret this." Joel ignored her, looking instead at the crowd. "We deserve transparency. We deserve honesty. And Daniel Harris is offering what we've never had a chance to own our homes legally without fear of bogus fines or harassment." Murmurs of agreement spread. Someone shouted, "We're with Daniel." Another voice joined, then another. Lucinda's composure shattered. She jabbed a finger at me, her voice shrill. "You think you've won because you wave old papers around. I dine with the commissioner every week. I play bridge with the judge's wife. You are nothing in this town. I stepped closer, my voice steady. Maybe. But my grandfather was everything in this town. And he left me more than land. He left me neighbors who remember his honesty. He left me the truth. And the truth doesn't belong to you. The crowd erupted in applause. For the first time, I saw fear flicker in Lucinda's eyes. After the meeting, as people clustered around me asking questions, a young woman tugged at my sleeve. "My name's Rachel," she whispered. "We just bought a lot last month. Everything we had went into it. Please, please don't take our dream away." Her eyes wide with desperation cut through the adrenaline. I knelt slightly to meet her gaze. "I don't want to take homes. I want to fix what's broken. If the court rules in my favor, I'll sell every house back to its residents legally, fairly, and without Lucinda's stranglehold." Tears filled her eyes. She nodded slowly. "Thank you." As I left the hall, I felt Lucinda's glare burn into my back. She stood with 2 board members hissing into her phone, no doubt calling every ally she had left. I knew retaliation would come swiftly, but tonight the tide had turned. The people no longer looked at me as a stranger threatening their homes. They looked at me as a possible way out, and Lucinda knew it. Back at the farmhouse, the phone buzzed with dozens of messages from supportive homeowners. Joel texted me one line: "You lit the fire tonight. Be ready for the explosion." I stepped onto the porch, staring across the darkened fields at the neat rows of those 68 houses. For weeks they had felt like monuments to my grandfather's erasure. Now they looked like something else entirely leverage. Not just against Lucinda, but against every system she'd corrupted. And for the first time, I believed I could win. The morning after the community center erupted, the headlines in the Brookdale Gazette hit harder than any weapon Lucinda could wield. HOA under fire surveys reveal 68 homes on disputed land. The article quoted me, Victor, and even Joel. It laid out in damning detail how Maple Ridge HOA had used questionable documents to claim ownership, and how the very houses people now lived in could legally be mine. The story spread across town like wildfire. By lunchtime, my phone buzzed nonstop with calls from reporters, neighboring counties, and even homeowners I'd never met begging for clarity. Lucinda reacted exactly as I expected by going on the offensive. She held a press conference in front of the Maple Ridge clubhouse, flanked by Commissioner Avery and 2 board members. I watched it on local TV, sipping cold coffee from Grandpa's chipped mug. "This man is exploiting grieving families," Lucinda declared, her voice trembling with forced outrage. "He waves century-old papers and dares to claim homes where children sleep and families thrive. Maple Ridge has all the proper approvals. The county stands with us." But when a reporter asked about the forged signatures and missing notary stamps, her mask slipped. She stammered, glared, and finally stormed off camera. Avery hurried to cover her tracks, but the damage was done. That evening, Victor arrived at the farmhouse with something new, an environmental survey. He tossed the file onto the table. "Remember the wetlands at the north edge? Your grandfather was meticulous about protecting them. Turns out they're home to 2 endangered species. Under the Clean Water Act, Section 404, it's a federal violation to fill or build on those marshes without a permit. Maple Ridge didn't even apply." I flipped through the report, my heart pounding. Photos of herons nesting, maps of floodplains, even soil analysis. It was undeniable. So not only is the land mine I said, but building here is outright illegal. Victor grinned for the first time in weeks. "Exactly. This takes it out of Lucinda's backyard courtroom games and into federal jurisdiction. She won't be able to bribe her way out of this one." The timing couldn't have been better. 2 days later, federal inspectors arrived unannounced. I stood on the porch watching black SUVs pull into the muddy construction site. Agents in windbreakers spread out cameras, flashing, as they documented half-built foundations sitting squarely in protected wetlands. Word spread fast. By evening, the same homeowners who once feared me now rallied outside the farmhouse with hand-painted signs: "Fair homes, not fraud. Stop Ward, save Brookdale." Kids held banners while parents honked horns in support. For the first time, Lucinda wasn't just fighting me, she was fighting her own community. But she wasn't finished. The following night, just as I was reviewing documents, headlights flooded through the farmhouse windows. 3 white SUVs rolled into the yard, their engines growling. Men in dark jackets stepped out, their boots crunching on gravel. One handed me a thick envelope. "Cease and desist," he said flatly. "Withdraw your claims or face criminal charges." I tore the envelope open. Inside was a letter accusing me of fraudulent activity, complete with threats of fines and even jail time. Attached were doctored photos, showing me supposedly trespassing on HOA common property, my own driveway. Victor's advice echoed in my ears: document everything. I snapped photos of the SUVs, the men, the letter. Then I stepped forward and said, "Get off my land." Now, the leader smirked. "Enjoy your farmhouse while you can. It won't be yours much longer." But he was wrong. The law was finally swinging in my direction. The next morning, Carolyn from the county recorder's office knocked on my door. Her eyes darted nervously as she handed me a folder. "I shouldn't be doing this, but you need to see it." Inside were copies of memos from the 1,990 seconds when the boundary changes were filed. One was signed by Commissioner Avery himself, authorizing the adjustment without full review. Another noted a verbal approval from Planning Board Director Wilson. Neither had legal weight. Both were smoking guns. Carolyn lowered her voice. "They buried these records deep. But once the federal inspectors started asking questions, I pulled them. Daniel, they knew exactly what they were doing." By now, the community's mood had shifted from fear to fury. Families who once hid behind curtains began showing up at my porch, offering baked goods, bottled water, even handshakes of solidarity. Mrs. Ramirez told me, tears in her eyes, "We've lived under her fines for years. If you can free us from her grip, we'll stand with you." That solidarity gave me courage for what came next, a second community meeting. This time I called it myself. Flyers went out across town. "Emergency meeting, your home, your future. Brookdale High Auditorium, Friday night." When I arrived, the parking lot overflowed with cars. Inside, the auditorium buzzed with hundreds of voices. Homeowners, curious neighbors, even workers laid off from the halted construction. The stage was mine. I stepped to the microphone, holding up Grandpa's survey once again. "The court will soon decide what we already know, that this land was stolen. And when that ruling comes, I won't throw families out. I'll sell each home back to you legally, fairly, and without the corruption of Maple Ridge HOA. Together, we can form a new coalition, one that doesn't bleed you dry with absurd fines, one that actually serves the community." A roar of applause filled the room. People stood clapping, some even cheering through tears. Then I dropped the bombshell. "And one more thing, Maple Ridge built part of this neighborhood on protected wetlands. Federal law will stop them cold. They gambled with your futures and they lost." Gasps echoed, followed by angry murmurs. In the front row, Joel stood and raised his hand. "I've seen the books. Over $400, 000 of your money went into Lucinda's pockets last year alone, landscaping contracts to her nephew, security fees to her brother-in-law. It ends tonight." The crowd erupted again. Some chanted, "Down with Ward, down with Ward." Lucinda was there, of course. She stormed down the aisle, her face flushed crimson. "You fools," she screamed, pointing at me. "He'll ruin you all. He doesn't care about your homes, he just wants power." But her voice was drowned in the thunder of boos. People turned their backs on her as she tried to shout over them. She realized in that moment she had lost her most important weapon, fear. I raised my hand, calling for quiet. "This isn't about me. It's about every family here. It's about the Harris land, yes, but it's also about freedom from tyranny. Tonight I ask you, will you stand with me?" The answer came like a tidal wave. Nearly every hand in the auditorium shot up. The noise was deafening, a wall of hope and anger crashing down on Lucinda's empire. She glared at me, her lips curling into a snarl. "You'll regret this, Harris. I promise you that." But I could see it in her eyes. She was cornered, and she knew it. That night, as I walked back to my truck, dozens of homeowners surrounded me, shaking my hand, thanking me, pledging their support. For the first time since this battle began, I didn't feel like a lone heir fighting for a dead man's farm. I felt like a leader of something bigger, a rebellion. Lucinda had her threats. I had the truth, the law, and now the people. And together we were unstoppable. The courthouse smelled faintly of old paper and polished wood as I took my seat at the plaintiff's table. Weeks of preparation, sleepless nights, and endless harassment had brought me here to the first major hearing of Harris v. 7, Maple Ridge HOA. Across the aisle, Lucinda sat stiff-backed in a tailored navy suit, her eyes cold, her lips twisted into that same smile she used to intimidate homeowners at community meetings. Around her were 3 attorneys from a prestigious firm in the city. But for all the pomp, I could see the tightness in her shoulders. She knew the tide had shifted. Victor leaned toward me, whispering, "Stay calm. Let the documents speak." The judge entered, a heavy-set man with thinning hair and a reputation for fairness. "We are here to determine the validity of the Harris property surveys and the contested boundary adjustments recorded in 1986 and 1998. His gavel struck. Proceed. Victor rose, walking deliberately to the evidence board. He held up Grandpa's original 1,915 survey enlarged on a poster. Your Honor, this survey, updated again in 1979, shows the Harris farm extending 80 acres north and east of its current record. For decades, this land was farmed by Henry Harris, taxes paid faithfully, boundaries never disputed. Then suddenly, in 1995, a shell company tied to Maple Ridge HOA filed a deed transferring the land. But the supposed seller, Mr. Harris, never signed anything. He flipped to the forged document, then another enlarged poster showing Grandpa's true signature from his will. The difference was glaring, one neat and fluid, the other jagged and clumsy. To confirm, Victor continued, we called a forensic document examiner. An older woman with wire-rimmed glasses approached the stand. She testified calmly, pointing out the inconsistencies, stroke hesitations, letter formations, ink pressure. In my professional opinion, she concluded the signatures on the 1,986 and 1,998 boundary adjustments were not written by Henry Harris. Lucinda's attorneys objected, muttering about irrelevant testimony, but the judge silenced them with a raised hand. Overruled. Continue. Next came the county clerk, Carolyn, visibly nervous, as she recounted the buried memos linking Commissioner Avery to the fraudulent filings. Proper procedure was ignored, she admitted. There was no notarization, no full review. The changes should never have been accepted. The defense tried to paint her as unreliable, but she produced copies of the memos complete with Avery's signature. The courtroom murmured, and even the judge's brow furrowed. Then came the blow Victor had been saving. He called Joel to the stand. The treasurer carried with him a thick binder, Maple Ridge's financial records. His voice trembled at first, but steadied as he spoke. For 7 years, I've watched as Lucinda siphoned homeowner dues into companies owned by her relatives. Landscaping security, even legal retainers contracts awarded without bids, invoices inflated, hundreds of thousands disappearing. When Daniel Harris presented the surveys, I realized the land Maple Ridge built on wasn't ours to begin with. That's when I decided I couldn't stay silent. Lucinda shot up, slamming her palms on the table. He's lying. He's a disgruntled employee. Sit down, Miss Ward, the judge barked. One more outburst and I'll hold you in contempt. The gallery erupted in whispers. Homeowners packed the benches, many nodding in agreement with Joel's words. For the first time, I felt the full weight of the community behind me. When it was Lucinda's turn, her lawyers argued desperately. They claimed the surveys were outdated, that the county's maps were the final authority, that any inconsistencies were clerical errors. But when pressed about the missing notary stamps and Avery's suspicious involvement, they fumbled. Worse, when asked about the $12 million loan taken against my land, Lucinda's face flushed crimson. She muttered about standard financing, but the judge's frown deepened. By the end of the day, the judge ruled the injunction would remain in place until a final decision could be made. There is compelling evidence of fraud, he said. The court requires a full review of all surveys, deeds, and financial transactions before ruling on ownership. He banged the gavel, court adjourned. It wasn't final victory, but it was momentum. Outside, reporters swarmed. Cameras flashed. Microphones shoved toward me. Mr. Harris, do you really plan to claim all 68 homes? I steadied my voice. I plan to do what's fair. The law says the land is mine. That means the homes are too. But I won't evict families. I'll offer them legal ownership free from corruption. Everyone deserves security. Everyone deserves honesty. Behind me, I heard boos and jeers. Lucinda was being escorted into her SUV by her lawyers, the crowd pelting her with shouted accusations. You stole from us. Where's our money, Lucinda? Her empire was crumbling before my eyes. That evening, the farmhouse porch was crowded again, this time not with harassment, but with hope. Families gathered, children running in the yard, while parents thanked me with tears in their eyes. Mrs. Ramirez hugged me tightly. For years, she made us feel like trespassers in our own homes. You gave us back our dignity. I looked out toward the silent construction site, the half-built houses standing ghostly in the twilight. This war wasn't over. Lucinda still had connections, money, and venom. But I had something stronger now, truth backed by law, and a community ready to fight with me. Victor joined me on the porch, sipping sweet tea. You realize what's coming next, don't you? Discovery phase. We'll subpoena emails, bank records, everything. If there's dirt, and there is, we'll find it. Lucinda's about to be buried under her own lies. I nodded, my jaw set. Good. She buried my grandfather's legacy once. It's time she learns what happens when the truth digs its way back out. The cicadas hummed as night fell their chorus, mixing with the distant voices of neighbors laughing on my lawn. For the first time since this nightmare began, I let myself smile. The trap Grandpa laid decades ago was tightening, and Lucinda Ward had no way out. The weeks that followed were a blur of subpoenas, depositions, and tense meetings. Victor worked tirelessly, assembling an arsenal of evidence that cut through Maple Ridge's defenses like a hot knife. Every email, every bank statement Joel handed over painted the same picture: an HOA turned personal empire with Lucinda Ward at its center. Discovery unearthed contracts awarded to her nephew's landscaping company 3 times the market rate. Payments to her brother-in-law's security firm, which amounted to a handful of men leaning against SUVs smoking cigarettes. Even HOA legal fees were funneled into a shell company she secretly controlled. More than $600, 000, had vanished in 5 years. When these records were leaked to the press, the outrage was volcanic. Homeowners demanded answers. News vans lined Maple Ridge's pristine cul-de-sacs, broadcasting stories of retirees forced to sell because of mounting fines, single parents struggling under endless assessments, families drained of savings. The glossy image of luxury living shattered overnight. Meanwhile, the federal investigation into the wetlands violation gathered momentum. Agents confirmed that at least 12 of the 68 houses sat squarely within protected marshland. Each foundation was a violation of federal law, punishable by fines that could bankrupt even the most ambitious developer. Under pressure, the bank that had financed the $12 million loan froze Maple Ridge's accounts. Contractors walked off the job. The development site became a ghost town of half-built shells, a silent monument to greed. Then came the ruling. The courthouse was packed beyond capacity, homeowners spilling into hallways, reporters jostling for space. The judge read from his prepared statement, voice steady but firm. Based on the surveys from 1,915 and 1,979, the forged signatures on the 1,986 and 1,998 filings, and the overwhelming evidence of fraudulent transfer, this court recognizes the Harris family as the rightful owner of the contested property. All 68 homes built on this land are hereby declared the legal property of Daniel Harris. Gasps echoed through the chamber. Some homeowners wept openly. Lucinda's face drained of color, her hands clutching the table as though it were the only thing keeping her upright. The judge wasn't finished. Furthermore, given the financial improprieties uncovered during discovery, the court refers Miss Ward and associated board members to the district attorney for potential charges of fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. Effective immediately, Maple Ridge HOA is dissolved pending reorganization. His gavel struck. Just like that, decades of corruption collapsed with a single boom. I stood slowly, my legs trembling. All eyes were on me. Reporters shouted questions. Homeowners pressed forward. But in that moment I thought only of Grandpa, and the promise I had whispered in his empty office: I won't let you down. In the days that followed, I kept my word. I met with every homeowner individually. Some were angry, some terrified, most simply exhausted. To each, I offered the same deal: purchase their homes at fair value, free from the shadow of Maple Ridge. No bogus fines, no arbitrary rules, just clean titles and honest agreements. Many accepted with tears of relief. A few resisted at first, suspicious of my intentions, but eventually they too realized I wasn't Lucinda. The money from the sales wasn't a windfall. It mostly went back into legal fees, restoring the farmhouse, and creating what I knew Grandpa would have wanted: a community park. On the stretch of wetlands where Lucinda had once dreamed of paving streets, we erected a conservation easement. Wooden boardwalks wound through marsh grasses with plaques describing the herons and turtles that called it home. Children now played where bulldozers once scarred the soil. As for Lucinda, her downfall was swift and merciless. Stripped of her position, indicted on multiple charges, and abandoned by the very officials she once controlled, she faced a trial of her own. Rumors swirled of plea deals, of prison time, of fortunes lost. To me, none of it mattered anymore. She had destroyed herself, just as Grandpa predicted. 1 year later, I sat on the farmhouse porch, watching children ride bikes along streets, once patrolled by Lucinda's compliance officers. Mailboxes stood proudly in colors of every shade, gardens bloomed with vegetables and wildflowers, and families painted their homes without fear of fines. The air carried laughter instead of tension. Mrs. Atkins joined me, settling into the rocking chair beside mine. "Your grandfather would be proud," she said softly, handing me a glass of sweet tea. I gazed at the horizon where the sun dipped low over the reclaimed fields. "He always said the best trap isn't about catching someone," I murmured. It's about showing them they were wrong to step foot here in the first place." She smiled, her eyes glistening. "Well, Daniel, you sprung it, and you gave this town its soul back." I looked out at the 68 homes now legally and fairly owned by the families who lived in them. They weren't symbols of theft anymore. They were monuments to justice, resilience, and the legacy of a man who refused to be erased. For the first time since this war began, I felt peace. And I knew the Harris land was finally safe, not just for me, but for every soul who called it home. If this story taught me anything, it's that legacy is more than deeds and surveys. It's the fight to protect what matters most, even when the odds are stacked against you. My grandfather didn't leave me wealth. He left me truth, discipline, and a community that needed someone to stand up when no one else would. In a world where power often bends the rules, sometimes all it takes is one person unwilling to sell out no matter the price. To everyone watching, remember, justice doesn't always come easy. It demands courage, persistence, and sacrifice. But when you hold firm, you don't just win for yourself, you win for everyone who stands beside you. Drop a comment below and tell me, have you ever fought back against something that felt too big to beat? And don't forget to subscribe. More stories are coming, and you won't want to miss the next battle for truth.